My name is Madison. I am 32 years old, and my divorce was finalized just over 3 years ago. For that exact same amount of time, I have been secretly keeping a roof over my mother's head. She introduces me at family gatherings as her free-spirited daughter, a euphemism she has crafted that really means I am a failure in her eyes. But ironically, it is my so-called failed life that has been paying her bills and keeping the lights on. Tonight, at what was supposed to be a celebratory family dinner, she finally went too far. My mother, Deborah, let out a sharp theatrical laugh that sliced through the restaurant's ambient chatter. "So how does it feel to be so useless, honey?" she asked, her voice pitched just loud enough for every relative at our long table to hear. My gut clenched instantly, that old familiar impulse to shrink, to make myself smaller, to just apologize for existing. But for the first time, the feeling was fleeting. It passed like a cloud. I met her gaze across the table, my own expression calm, and I said, "It feels fantastic, actually, especially since I just stopped paying your rent." Her painted smile did not just fade, it shattered. It was as if I had reached across the table and physically wiped it off her face. The lively conversation around us died in a single collective gasp. The silence was so abrupt, it was deafening. Across from me, my father's fork slipped from his grasp, clattering loudly against his porcelain plate. He was staring at me as if I had just grown a second head. "What rent? Why?" he demanded, his tone carrying an edge I had not heard him use in years. My mother's eyes, wide with panic, darted between my father and me. I could see the gears turning in her head as she desperately searched for an angle, a way to twist my words and paint me as the villain, just as she always had. But this time was different. This time, I was not going to retreat. She had absolutely no idea that this confrontation was not some spontaneous outburst. It was an event I had been meticulously planning for months, down to the last word, and most importantly, the audience. What unfolded after that one sentence sent a shockwave through my entire family and left me with a choice. Finally break the chains or willingly put them back on. For a long, stretched-out moment, nobody moved. The entire table seemed to have forgotten how to breathe. Then, my mother found her voice again, wrapping it in a cloak of dismissive annoyance. "Oh, do not be so dramatic, Madison," she snapped, forcing a brittle laugh that fooled no one. "She is just making a joke. You all know how sensitive she gets." I did not even let her finish the sentence. "I am not joking," I said, my gaze fixed firmly on my father. "For 3 years, I have paid her rent. Every single month. It came out of my salary, and it came out of my divorce settlement. She told me you could not handle the stress of knowing, so I stayed quiet. But I am done." That finally broke through his confusion. My father's face transitioned from bewilderment to a sickly pale, and then to an expression I had not witnessed since their marriage fell apart. Pure, ice-cold fury. "Is that true, Deborah?" he asked her, his voice dangerously low and slow. "Have you been taking money from our daughter behind my back?" My mother, Deborah, straightened her spine in her chair, her shoulders going rigid. "Oh, for heaven's sake," she scoffed, trying to regain control. "You know how she exaggerates. My hours were cut at work and I needed a little bit of help. I did not want to burden you, Gary, so I asked our daughter. That is what family is for." "A little help?" I repeated, and I could feel that familiar, hot anger beginning to rise in my chest. "Mom, I have paid for your entire apartment, including utilities, for 36 consecutive months. You called me sobbing, telling me you were going to be evicted and become homeless. You said if I did not step in, you would be out on the street and the whole world would know what a selfish, heartless daughter I was." A low murmur rippled through the family members seated around the table. My dad looked from her face to mine, the pieces clicking into place. "I never knew any of this," he said, his voice a low growl. "You told me you were managing just fine. You said you had everything under control." "I did have it under control," she shot back, her voice rising. And now she is trying to humiliate me in front of our entire family because she is bitter about her failed marriage. I almost let out a laugh of my own, a real one. You humiliated me first, I reminded her, gesturing to the very people she had been complaining to about me for years. But you are right about one thing. This is about control. You did not just need help, you enjoyed having the leverage. As long as I was the one paying, you could call me a useless failure and still be certain that the money would arrive on the first of every month. Her jaw tightened. For the first time all night, she was speechless. She did not have a pre-packaged comeback. "Why did you not tell me, Madison?" my dad asked again, his eyes pleading with me. "Because every time I even hinted at saying no, she would use you against me," I replied, the memory making my voice shake slightly. She would say, "You are becoming just like your father, always running away when things get tough." And I believed her. For so long, I thought I owed her my silence, my compliance, my entire life. I was acutely aware of everyone at the table watching this exchange, this private drama made public, but I did not care anymore. This was not just a simple argument. This was testimony, and I was just getting started. The real question was, would anyone at this table finally see her for who she truly was? Or would they fall back into their old habit of pretending I was the one with the problem? 3 years, my dad repeated, as if the words themselves were a foreign concept he was trying to understand. I did not answer right away. My mind was suddenly thrown back to the night it all began. I had just moved out of the house I had shared with my ex-husband, hauling dusty boxes that held the fragments of my broken marriage into a tiny shoebox apartment I could barely afford. Before I had even had a chance to assemble my bed frame, my mother had called. She was hysterical, sobbing so uncontrollably that her words were mangled. "They are raising my rent," she had wailed into the phone. "Your father does not give a damn. He just told me to tighten my belt and figure it out." She continued, her voice dripping with manufactured despair. "I cannot do this by myself, Madison. You know how fragile my nerves are. Are you really going to abandon your own mother in her time of need?" I remember staring at the stacks of unpacked boxes, the air still thick with the scent of a life that was no longer mine, feeling like a complete failure in every possible way. "I will help," I had said, my throat tight with unshed tears, "just until you get things sorted out." Her sobbing ceased instantly. The shift was so sudden it should have been a red flag. "I knew you were a good daughter," she had said, her voice now smooth as silk. "You always had a much bigger heart than your father." That was the first payment. 1 month of help bled into 3. 3 months turned into a year. Every time I tried to suggest that I could not sustain it, she would weaponize her words with surgical precision. "After everything I sacrificed to raise you, if you will not help me, who will?" Or her favorite, "No wonder your marriage fell apart. You only ever think about yourself. And the one that cut the deepest, you are lucky I still acknowledge you as my daughter at all." Sitting at that dinner table now, it was crystal clear how rehearsed those lines had been, and how willingly I had swallowed every poisonous word. He does not need to be bothered with every little detail. Gary, my mother's voice cut through my memories, her hand waving dismissively at my father. I asked for help as a mother. She agreed to help as a daughter. It is perfectly normal. I agreed because you made me feel like a monster if I even thought about saying no, I corrected her. You told me Dad would turn the entire family against me if he knew you were struggling financially. You said he would claim you were irresponsible with money. So I kept your secret. I took on your debt, your rent, and all of your guilt. My dad's gaze hardened. "Deborah," he said, using her name like a final warning. "Did you tell our daughter that?" She let out a nervous, high-pitched laugh that did not reach her eyes. "You know how she gets so dramatic," she tried again, her default defense. "I was under an incredible amount of stress. I might have said some things I did not entirely mean. You meant every single word I stated, my voice now devoid of any tremor. You wanted me to be scared and dependent. As long as I believed I owed you for my own existence, I would never leave you. That is when another memory surfaced, the one that had been the true catalyst for tonight's performance. Just last month, my bank account had gone into overdraft because her rent payment went through on the same day my car's transmission decided to die. I had called her, panicked and near tears. Instead of a shred of sympathy, her voice had been cold and judgmental. Well, if you learned how to manage your money better, Madison, you would not find yourself in these situations. Maybe you were just not cut out for this whole adult life thing. That night, I had just stared at my banking app, at the negative balance, then at the mountain of receipts and text messages between us. And something inside me finally snapped. I went to a print shop the next day. I printed every bank statement, every screenshot of her pleading texts, and I started recording our phone calls. I knew with absolute certainty that she would never stop on her own, not as long as her manipulations remained our little secret. You want to talk about being useless? I said now, feeling my own voice find a new, solid foundation. I have been paying your rent, your internet, and your electricity. I also bailed you out when you maxed out that emergency credit card. And yet, in every story you tell people, I am still the family failure. She opened her mouth to retort, but this time I was quicker. Tonight was never just a dinner, I said, my voice low and clear. It was my declaration of independence. I am not here to protect your reputation anymore. I reached into my purse, my fingers brushing against the crisp edge of the large manila envelope I had brought with me. It was stuffed with bank statements, screenshots, and the new lease agreement I had signed for a new apartment, for me and me alone. I had not been entirely sure how far I was willing to take this when I arrived, but after she had laughed in my face, after all the years of being called worthless while I single-handedly funded her lifestyle, that decision suddenly became startlingly clear. Was I really about to pull out every piece of evidence in front of my father, my relatives, and a restaurant full of strangers, and finally expose the person she was behind closed doors? The background noise of the restaurant slowly began to seep back into our bubble of tension, the clinking of glasses, the murmur of distant conversations. But at our table, the silence was still a physical presence. My mother's eyes were glued to my hand as I slowly pulled the thick envelope from my bag and placed it on the table with a soft thud. "What is that?" she asked, her voice stretched tight with alarm. "Proof," I said simply, "of every single transfer, every loan that was never repaid, every text message where you swore you just needed one more month." My dad reached for it, but my mother's hand shot out and slapped down on top of the envelope. "Gary, do not," she said, her voice a panicked hiss. "This is absolutely ridiculous. She is overreacting. We can discuss this at home." I looked my father directly in the eye. "We have tried talking at home, Dad," I said. "That is how we ended up here. She relies on private conversations because she knows she can twist them and rewrite history later. That is why I brought this. That is why I am doing this here. I needed witnesses." I could feel the gazes from nearby tables, people pretending not to be completely engrossed in our family implosion. Normally, that kind of attention would have made me want to crawl under the table, but tonight it felt like a shield. Let them listen. Let them finally see her without her carefully crafted script. My dad gently but firmly slid the envelope out from under her hand. As he did, a cascade of papers spilled out onto the white tablecloth, bank statements with fluorescent yellow highlighting, screenshots of her desperate messages, my own scribbled notes detailing dates and amounts. He began to flip through them, his brow furrowed. The silence that followed was more damning than any shouting match could ever be. "You told me your sister helped you with that credit card bill," he said, staring at one of the pages. "You told me your job was covering the rent that you were managing." My mother's smile was a grotesque, painted-on thing. "I did not want to add to your stress." she insisted, her voice trembling. "You yelled at me the last time I brought up money. I asked Madison because she offered." "No," I cut in, my voice sharp. "You cried. You said if I did not help, you would just vanish and it would all be my fault. You explicitly told me not to tell him because, and I quote, he never gave a damn anyway. You made me carry all of it alone." My father's hand was trembling slightly as he held the papers. He was never an overtly emotional man, but I could see something cracking inside him, a fault line that had probably formed decades ago when their marriage first started to crumble. "Did you really say that about me?" he asked her, his voice barely a whisper. "That I do not care?" My mother's mask of composure slipped for a fraction of a second. "I was upset," she muttered, looking down. "You always try to make me out to be the villain. Do you have any idea how hard it is to be the only one holding this family together?" I almost choked on a laugh. "Holding it together?" I repeated, incredulous. "You have been pulling the strings. You insult me in public, but in private, you are draining my bank account. You call me useless while living in an apartment that I pay for." Her eyes, now blazing with fury, snapped to mine. "You watch your tone," she hissed. "I am still your mother." "Exactly," I said, my voice dropping to a quiet intensity. "You are my mother. You were supposed to be the one to protect me, not the one to turn me into your personal emergency fund." I could feel the years of suppressed rage boiling just beneath my skin, but I forced my voice to remain level. "And just so we are perfectly clear, starting next month, your landlord will be contacting you for the rent, not me." Her head jerked up as if I had slapped her. "What?" "I already spoke to him," I said. "I informed him that my payments would be stopping. I also had him remove my name from any and all documents it was never supposed to be on in the first place." The color drained from her face. "You would not dare." "I already did," I replied. "That is why I said it feels fantastic. For the first time, your consequences are entirely your own." A couple at the table next to ours exchanged an unsubtle, wide-eyed look. My mother saw it. Her voice dropped, a new, desperate note of panic creeping in. "People are staring at us," she whispered urgently. "You are embarrassing yourself." "No," I said, shaking my head. "I am embarrassing you. And the fact that you are more concerned about that than about what you have done for the past 3 years tells me everything I need to know." My heart was pounding so hard I could feel the pulse in my throat, but a strange sense of calm had settled over me. There was no turning back. "Madison," my dad said slowly, his voice laced with a dawning horror. "Is this why you were always so short on cash? Why you had to turn down that vacation with your friends? Why you sold your car?" My mother jumped in before I could answer. "Oh, please." "She has always been terrible with money. You know how impulsive she is. She is just trying to shift the blame onto me because it is easier than taking responsibility for her own life." I pulled my phone from my pocket, opened a specific folder, and placed it on the table, screen up. "These are recordings," I said, my voice steady, "from the last few months, of our phone calls, of the things you said to me when you thought no one else was listening." Her eyes widened in genuine terror. "You recorded me?" "I told you I was tired of feeling like I was going crazy," I replied. "So I started keeping receipts, both literal and emotional. I needed to know that I was not just imagining the way you spoke to me." For the first time that evening, she looked truly, deeply afraid. Not angry, not indignant, but terrified. "You would not play those," she whispered, leaning forward. "Not here, not in front of everyone. You are not that cruel." I just stared at her, and a montage of memories flashed through my mind. Every time she had told me I would amount to nothing without her. Every night I had lain awake, sick with worry about paying her rent instead of buying my own groceries. Every single time she had laughed at my pain as if it were a joke. "You spent years teaching me that love is a transaction and that the price is humiliation," I said. "Tonight, I get to decide what love means for me. My thumb hovered over the play button on the screen. If I pressed it, it would be the end of all pretense. No more, she is just sensitive. There would only be the raw, ugly truth of her voice filling the silence. Was I really prepared to let everyone hear the way my own mother spoke to me when she thought the world could not hear? Before my thumb could make its final descent, a gentle hand closed around my wrist. I looked up, startled, to see my aunt standing beside me. Brenda, my mother's younger sister. I had not even realized she had arrived. She must have come in late and heard enough to understand the scene she had walked into. "Let her talk first, Madison," Aunt Brenda said quietly, her eyes fixed on my mother. "You do not have to burn the whole world down in a single breath." My mother scoffed. "Oh, wonderful." "The family therapist has arrived," she muttered under her breath. Brenda ignored her completely. She pulled an empty chair from another table and sat down next to me, her presence a sudden, steadying anchor in the storm. "I heard enough from the host stand," she said, addressing my father and the rest of the table, "and this is not the first time Deborah has pulled something like this." My mother's head snapped toward her sister. "Excuse me." Brenda folded her hands calmly on the table. "Do you want me to bring up the time you opened a credit card in my name when I was in college?" she asked, her voice even. "Or should we talk about when you took money from Grandma Eleanor telling her it was for medical tests when you were actually redecorating your living room?" A collective gasp went around the table. My grandmother, Eleanor, who had been silent until now, stiffened at the mention of her name. "That was decades ago," my mother hissed, "and I paid you back." "No, you did not," Brenda corrected her flatly. "You guilted me into dropping it. You did the exact same thing you did to Madison to make her pay your rent. It is the same pattern, Deborah. You play the victim, you cry, you make promises. And the second someone calls you on your behavior, you label them as ungrateful and cruel." I had never, in my entire life, heard anyone speak to my mother that way without immediately backing down in the face of her fury. "You knew?" I asked Brenda, my voice coming out thinner than I wanted. "Not about the rent," she said, her eyes softening as she looked at me. If I had known about that, I would have stepped in a long time ago. But I recognized the tone in her voice. The way she was speaking to you just now, it is the exact same way she used to speak to me whenever she needed something. My mother shook her head, a look of profound disbelief on her face. "You are all ganging up on me," she said, her eyes shining with self-pitying tears. "I am the one who held this family together after the divorce. I did everything by myself, and this is the thanks I get." "You did not hold us together," I said, my voice soft but firm. "You held us hostage." The words hung in the air, heavier than anything else that had been said all night. My grandmother finally found her voice. "Is it true, Deborah?" Eleanor asked, her own voice trembling with emotion. "Did you really take money from Madison all this time?" My mother opened her mouth, then closed it, settling on a carefully constructed half-truth. "I borrowed some money when I needed help," she said. "Parents do that. I was going through a very difficult time. You all act as if I am some kind of monster." "Monsters do not always look like monsters," Brenda replied quietly. "Sometimes they just look like people who are incapable of admitting when they are wrong." Just then, my gaze drifted past my family, and I caught something that made my stomach lurch. At a nearby table, a teenager was blatantly recording our entire exchange on her phone, barely even pretending not to. My mother saw it at the same moment I did, and all the remaining color drained from her face. Her public image was everything to her. Her position on church committees, her role in community events, her perfectly curated Facebook persona as the strong, independent single mother who had overcome it all. The thought that strangers might see her like this, desperate, cornered, and exposed, was more terrifying to her than any financial trouble. "Please," she whispered, leaning toward me across the table, her voice cracking. "Do not play those recordings. Do not let anyone hear them." "Now you care what people hear?" I asked, a bitter taste in my mouth. You did not seem to care when you called me a burden, when you told me I would end up alone and miserable, when you said no one else would ever put up with me. Tears began to burn at the back of my eyes, but I refused to look away. You said all those things because you were convinced no one would ever know. You thought I would keep covering for you forever. My dad cleared his throat, and when he spoke, his voice was thick with emotion. "Madison," he said, "whether you play those tapes or not is entirely your decision. But I want you to know that I believe you. You should not have had to go to these lengths to prove it to me, and I am so sorry that I did not see what was happening sooner." That apology, so simple and sincere, hit me harder than any of my mother's insults ever had. For a moment, I had to look down at my hands in my lap just to steady myself. "I did not want to destroy you," I told my mother quietly, looking back up. "I just wanted you to stop. I wanted you to admit what you did and to finally let me go." She stared at me as if I were a complete stranger, and maybe, in that moment, I was. She was used to the version of me who folded, the one who apologized, the one who always sent the money and said nothing. "If you walk away from me now," she said, her voice shaking with a new kind of threat, "you will regret it. When you stumble, when life inevitably knocks you down again, you will find you have no one." "That is not true," Brenda said immediately, her voice strong. "She has me. She has her friends, and most importantly, she has herself. That is more than she has had in a very long time." I met my mother's gaze one last time. For the first time, I did not see the towering, intimidating figure who had dominated my life. I just saw a scared, deeply insecure woman who would rather burn every bridge she had than admit she had made a mistake. I slipped my phone back into my pocket without pressing play. "I am not sparing you," I said before she could mistake my action for forgiveness. "I am sparing myself." I do not need to hear those words again. I already know what they did to me. The teenager at the other table looked visibly disappointed, realizing the dramatic climax she was hoping for was not going to happen. I did not care. My revenge was never about putting on a show for strangers. It was about taking my life back. "But I am done paying your rent," I continued. "I am done keeping your secrets. If people find out the truth, it will not be because I exposed you. It will be because your own actions finally caught up with you." My mother swallowed hard, her face crumbling for a split second before she forced it back into a mask of composure. "So what now?" she asked, her voice brittle. "You just walk away?" I took a slow, deep breath. Every cell in my body wanted to shake, to scream, to finally let out the years of tears I had held back. But instead, I felt a strange, solid calmness. "What happens now," I said, "is that I finally stop being the useless daughter you always told me I was. Because the truth is, I was never useless. I was incredibly useful to you. You just never imagined I would stop." I pushed my chair back from the table. The sound of its legs scraping against the tile floor felt loud and final. "This is the last bill I will ever pay for you," I said, the emotional one. I had no idea what the coming days would look like or how far the fallout from tonight would spread. I just knew one thing with a terrifying, exhilarating clarity. I'd finally, unequivocally chosen myself. And as I turned to walk away from that table, I realized I still had one last move to make. One final decision that would determine whether this night ended with a quiet boundary being set, or with the complete and utter collapse of my mother's perfectly constructed world. Should I just walk away and let the truth do its own work, or should I use the proof I had to make sure she could never, ever twist this story again? I had not made it more than 10 feet from the table when I heard my dad call my name. "Madison, wait." There was an urgency in his voice that made me stop and turn. He was standing a few feet away from the others, the manila envelope clutched in his hand. His shoulders slumped as if the weight of the last hour had physically crushed him. Aunt Brenda stood beside him, her hand resting gently on his arm. My mother remained seated, a statue carved from ice and fury, her eyes darting around the restaurant to see who was still watching. "I just need to understand," he said quietly, as I walked back toward them. "What do you want to happen now?" No one in my entire life had ever asked me that question. Not what did your mother say? Not what did you do wrong? But what I actually wanted. The answer that came out surprised even me. "I want it to stop," I said, my voice clear. "I want her to stop using me as an emotional and financial crutch. I want her to stop twisting everything I say. I want her to stop acting like I am the problem when I am the one who has been paying the price for her choices." "And what about the money?" he asked, his eyes searching mine. "Do you want it back?" For a fleeting moment, I imagined demanding every single cent. There would be a grim satisfaction in watching her scramble, in making her finally feel the financial weight she had so casually dumped on me. But I knew, deep down, that a fight like that would cost me more than money. It would mean years of more arguments, more excuses, more of her poor me speeches. I did not want a revenge that would chain me to her for the rest of my life. "I want accountability," I said finally. "If she ever pays a dime of it back, it has to be because she chooses to, not because I am hounding her for it. The real payback for me is making sure she cannot do this to anyone ever again. Not to me, not to Brenda, not to anyone." Brenda nodded. "We can help make that happen," she said, "but it has to start with the unvarnished truth." The three of us walked back to the table together. The air was thick with unspoken words. My mother sat rigid, her hands clasped so tightly in her lap that her knuckles were white. "Are we finished with my public humiliation?" she asked, her voice dripping with venom. "Or would you like to read my diary out loud next?" My dad sat down slowly, methodically sliding the papers back into the envelope. "This was never about humiliation, Deborah," he said, his voice weary but firm. "This is about what you did. You lied to me. You lied to our daughter. You lied to your own mother and your sister. You took money from all of them and then manipulated them into feeling guilty for not giving you even more." She let out a sharp, bitter laugh. "Oh, please, as if you have never told a lie, as if you are some kind of saint." "I am not," he said, "but I am done pretending that this behavior is normal." He slid the envelope across the table toward her. "You are going to call your landlord tomorrow. You are going to inform him that the payments will no longer be coming from Madison, and you are going to work out a payment plan that does not involve our daughter's bank account in any way. So, you will pay it?" she snapped, a flicker of hope in her eyes. "Is that what this is all about? You want to swoop in and be the hero now?" "No," he said flatly. "I am not paying it either." She just stared at him, completely stunned into silence. "What?" "You got yourself into this mess," he said. "You told all of us you were fine. You took money behind my back. You turned our daughter into your personal safety net. That ends tonight. If you need a cheaper place to live, you downsize. If you need help, you ask for it honestly. But this," he tapped the envelope, "this never ever happens again." Her face twisted into a mask of rage. "You cannot do this to me," she seethed. "You cannot just abandon me." Brenda leaned forward. "You did not think twice about abandoning Madison when she needed emotional support," she said calmly. "You made her believe she was broken and then used her fear to keep her paying your bills. You abandoned her a long time ago. She is just finally walking out of the house you left in flames." The teenager at the other table was now openly filming, her phone held high. A few other patrons were watching our table without any pretense of privacy. My mother noticed, and that is when the facade truly cracked. "Stop staring at me," she suddenly shrieked at the room. "Mind your own business." A few people quickly looked away, but the damage was done. The pristine image she had spent a lifetime cultivating was shattering in real time, and she knew it. "You are all so ungrateful," she hissed, her glare returning to us. If it were not for me, none of you would have anything. I gave you life. I sacrificed everything for this family. You sacrificed my peace of mind, I said quietly, and now I am taking it back. I picked up my phone again, but not to play the recordings. I opened a group chat I had created earlier that day, a chat simply labeled The Truth. It included Brenda, my dad, my grandmother Eleanor, and two of my cousins who had witnessed pieces of my mother's behavior over the years, but had never seen the full picture. With a few taps, I attached a digital folder containing everything: the documents, the screenshots, the bank statements, and a written timeline of events. Then I hit send. The phones of my family members at the table buzzed almost in unison. My grandmother's eyes widened as she looked down at her screen. "What is—" "Oh my God," she murmured, her hand flying to her mouth. My mother's head snapped up. "What did you do?" "I made sure the truth cannot be erased or rewritten anymore," I said. "I am not posting it on social media. I am not trying to ruin your life online. I am just making sure that if you ever try to twist this story later, there are people who know exactly what happened." Her mouth opened and closed, a silent battle of rage and fear playing out on her face. "You think they will all turn against me?" she demanded. "Is that your big victory? Watching your own mother be abandoned?" "My victory," I said, "is finally understanding that whether they believe you or me no longer has any control over my life. I am done buying your version of the story." My dad put his phone down and looked at her, his expression grim. "If you want to have any kind of relationship with me, or with Madison, or with your own family," he said, "you are going to have to take responsibility for your actions. You will get help. You will stop using people. No more secrets. No more hidden debts. If you cannot do that, then you will be alone." For a split second, I thought she might actually break. Her eyes glistened. Her lower lip trembled. But then, something inside her hardened again. "Fine," she spat. "Go. All of you. Walk away. But do not you dare come crying to me when your lives fall apart. You will all see just how useless you really are without me." I stood up. "That is the thing, Mom," I said. "My life started getting better the second I stopped trying to prove I was not useless to you." I picked up my bag. Now I get to see what it looks like when I give all of that energy back to myself. As I walked towards the restaurant's exit, I felt every pair of eyes on my back, especially hers. But for the first time in my life, I did not feel small under that weight. I felt free. As the cool night air hit my face, a final thought lingered. I had taken back my power in that room. I had cut off her access to my bank account, to my guilt, and to my silence. And yet, a part of me still wondered, if you had the chance to completely demolish the reputation of someone who had spent years chipping away at your self-esteem, would you take it? Or is walking away with your peace intact the most powerful revenge of all? 3 months later, my alarm went off at 7 a.m. For the first time in years, my first thought was not, "Did Mom send a frantic text about money?" It was, "Do I feel like oat milk or regular in my coffee today?" It sounds like such a small, insignificant thing, but if you have ever woken up every single day bracing for someone else's manufactured crisis, you know how monumental that shift is. My phone's lock screen was blessedly quiet. No string of missed calls, no walls of guilt-tripping text messages. Just a good morning text from Brenda. "Therapy at 6. I am bringing your favorite snacks." And one from my dad. "Proud of you. Call me later if you have a minute." I had moved into a slightly nicer apartment a few weeks after that dinner. It was nothing extravagant, just a bright one-bedroom where the rent came out of my account for me, and only me. My budget was still showing the scars from 3 years of propping up my mother's finances, but without that constant draining expense, my banking app was no longer a source of panic attacks. I had even started a small savings account. Watching the number grow like a tiny, fragile plant, I was determined to keep alive. Work felt lighter, too. The job itself had not changed, But I had. I stopped volunteering for every overtime shift just to have a buffer for her next emergency. I stopped apologizing every time I needed to take a sick day. My boss had noticed. "You seem more present lately, Madison," she had remarked last week. "Whatever you have changed, keep doing it." But not everything was a fairy tale. The fallout from that night had spread quietly but decisively. My mother lost her apartment within a month. She did not tell me, of course. I heard it from my grandmother first, and then Brenda filled in the details. Mom had refused to even look for a cheaper place, convinced that someone would eventually cave and rescue her. When no one did, the eviction notice was served. She ended up renting a single room in a shared house on the other side of town, far from the affluent neighborhood where everyone knew her as the resilient, independent woman who never needed a thing. Her social circle began to shrink. The woman who once hosted every baby shower and holiday get-together was suddenly no longer on the invitation lists. People did not confront her, they just created distance. My grandmother, Eleanor, had also cut her off financially. "I love her, Madison," Grandma told me over the phone, her voice heavy with sadness. "But I am done enabling her lies. I should have put a stop to this years ago. I am so sorry." My dad began the slow, painful process of untangling his finances from hers completely. He stopped covering her small emergencies. He stopped believing that every crisis was someone else's fault. He started going to therapy, too. It turned out my mother was not the only one in the family who had been avoiding difficult truths. As for my mother, she reacted exactly as you might expect. At first, she bombarded me with messages that swung wildly between tear-filled apologies and vicious, hateful attacks. And I am so sorry. I never realized how much "I hurt you" would be followed a day later by a "you have turned the entire family against me. I hope you are happy now that you have ruined my life." My therapist called it the extinction burst. She explained that people who have always gotten their way through guilt and manipulation do not just change overnight. They push all the buttons harder and harder until they finally realize the machine is unplugged. So I did something that felt radical for me. I did not respond. Not to the attacks, not to the compliments that were clearly dipped in poison, and not to the nostalgic "remember when" messages. I had stated my boundary at that dinner table. Until she was ready to accept responsibility without trying to twist it into my fault, there was nothing left to say. Then, one afternoon, she asked to meet. It was not a long, dramatic text. It was just a short, simple message. "Can we talk? Neutral place. No talk of money." My stomach did a nervous flip when I read it. Part of me wanted to just ignore it. But another part, the part that remembered the rare, fleeting glimpses of a different version of her from my childhood, told me that I needed some form of closure. We met at a quiet cafe across town, far from the scene of the original crime, a neutral territory. When I walked in, I almost did not recognize her. She looked smaller somehow, less polished. Her hair was not perfectly coiffed, and her makeup was minimal. She looked tired. "You look good, Madison," she said as I sat down. The compliment landed differently this time. It was not bait. It was not a setup for a backhanded comment. It just felt like an observation. "Thanks," I said. "You too." It was not entirely true, but it was polite. We sat in a tense silence for a moment, the clinking of spoons against ceramic filling the void. Finally, she spoke. "I lost my apartment," she said bluntly. "I know," I replied. "Grandma told me." Her mouth tightened for a second, but she nodded. Of course she did. She took a deep breath. "I was furious with you for that," she admitted. "I told myself that you had abandoned me, that you were enjoying watching me struggle." She swallowed hard. But then I started actually looking at the numbers. Really looking. What I earned. What you had been sending me. What I had been telling everyone. And I realized I was living a life based on 3 incomes: yours, mine, and whatever I could squeeze out of other people. I did not even know how to live on just mine anymore. Hearing her say those words out loud felt like stepping into an alternate reality. "Why are you telling me this now?" I asked, genuinely curious. "Because," she said slowly, "I have been talking to someone, a counselor. At first, I only went because I wanted someone to validate my feelings, to give me proof that you were the one overreacting. I wanted a professional to tell me I was just a stressed mother doing her best." She let out a bitter little laugh. But she did not say that. She asked me why I was more afraid of being seen as a bad mother than I was of actually being one. I did not say a word. I just let her talk, for the first time in a long time. "She made me write it all down," Mom continued, her voice barely above a whisper. "Every single time I asked you for money, every time I made you feel guilty, every time I told you that you would be nothing without me, seeing it all there on paper." She shook her head. It looked so ugly, so desperate. It looked like the way my own mother used to talk to me when I tried to leave home. That part shocked me. She almost never spoke about her childhood except to say that she had escaped it. "So you became her," I said quietly, the realization dawning on me. "You told yourself you were different because you thought you had better reasons." Her eyes flashed, not with anger, but with a flicker of pained recognition. "That is what the counselor said too," she admitted, "that I had built my entire identity on not being my mother, and in the process, I became her anyway." She looked down at her hands. "I am not telling you any of this to make you feel sorry for me," she added quickly. "I know I do not deserve that. I am trying to stop lying. To you and to myself." The silence stretched between us again, but this time it did not feel suffocating. "So what do you want from me?" I finally asked. "Because if this is leading to a request for help with your new place, the answer is still no." "I know," she said immediately. "I am not asking for money." She hesitated. "I am asking for a chance. Not to go back to how things were, I know that is impossible, but maybe someday to have something. A phone call that does not end in a screaming match. A coffee that is not about bills. I do not expect it today or even tomorrow. I do not want the last real conversation between us to be that horrible dinner." I thought about that night. I thought about her cruel, cutting laugh. I thought about the way my voice had not shaken when I finally said, "I stopped paying your rent." I thought about the girl filming, the witnesses, the envelope on the table, and I thought about the 3 months since, how much lighter my entire world felt, and how much work it had taken to rebuild even a fraction of my self-worth. "Here is what I can offer," I said slowly, choosing my words with care. "I am not ready to forgive you. Not yet. Maybe not for a very long time. And even if I do, forgiveness does not mean forgetting what happened or pretending it was not as bad as it was." She nodded, her eyes wet. "I understand. If you keep going to your counseling," I continued, "if you stop asking me for money, and if you can learn to talk to me without calling me names or bringing up a laundry list of my past mistakes, then maybe we can start with very small things. A text, a short phone call. We can see if you are capable of treating me like a person who does not owe you her entire existence." Her lips trembled. "And if I mess up, then I step back again," I said firmly, "because this boundary is not a punishment for you. It is protection for me. I am never going back to being your emotional wallet, your punching bag, or your backup plan. You do not get to call me useless and then live off my labor." A single tear slipped down her cheek. She wiped it away quickly, as if showing emotion was still a weakness to be hidden. "Fair?" she whispered. "That is more than fair." We sat there for a moment longer, two women who shared DNA but lived in completely different worlds, trying to see if a bridge could be built between us that was not paved with debt and damage. Maybe there was. Maybe there was not. But for the first time, I felt like the choice of whether or not to cross it was entirely mine. As we stood to leave, she looked at me, a shy, uncertain expression on her face. "You know," she said, "you were never useless, Madison. I think I needed you to believe you were, so I would not have to face how useless I felt without your help. It was not the grand, sweeping apology I had once fantasized about hearing, but it was something real. It was messy and imperfect and human. I know, I said, and that is exactly why I cannot be that person for you anymore. Later that night, lying in my own bed in my own apartment that I paid for with my own money, I scrolled back through our old text messages, the ones filled with panic and guilt and desperate pleas. Then I looked at the most recent ones, short, careful, neutral. For the first time in my life, I did not feel like my mother's emotional hostage. I felt like my own person. People often say that revenge is about making the other person suffer in the same way you did. But as I stood in that cafe, hearing her admit what she had done, not because she was cornered, not because I played a recording, but because she had finally been forced to look at herself, I realized my revenge was already complete. She had lost her apartment. She had lost her illusion of control, and she had lost the version of me who would do anything to keep her happy. I did not need to ruin her life. I just needed to stop letting her ruin mine. So now I will ask you, if your own mother laughed in your face, called you useless, and lived off your sacrifices for years, would you burn her world to the ground the moment you finally got the chance? Or would you simply walk away, build something better for yourself, and let the truth be the one thing that finally catches up to her? End of story.